Aisha Coleman, a 19-year-old black girl, stands shackled in a sweltering Memphis courtroom, sweat beading on her forehead as Judge Raymond Carver's gavel crashes down, sentencing her to 20 years for a robbery she swears she didn't commit. His sneer twists as he mocks her braided hair and frayed shirt, spitting street rat-playing victim. To a stunned crowd, gasps ripple when Aisha, voice steady, vows to appeal herself. Carver cackles, but her steely glare hides a secret that could topple empires. What will her next move unleash? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more stories that fight the system. Aisha Coleman sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor of a cramped Memphis holding cell, her wrists still raw from the shackles that had bitten into her skin during the courtroom fiasco, her mind a whirlwind of legal strategies as she scratched notes onto a flimsy napkin with a stubby pencil. She'd begged off a guard who'd sneered at her effort. The air stank of mildew and sweat, thick with the summer heat that pressed against the barred window high above her head, but she barely noticed, her focus razor-sharp as she scribbled citations from memory, pulling from the dog-eared law books. Her late uncle Marcus had left behind in their crumbling shotgun house on the edge of town. Marcus had been a paralegal before cancer took him 3 years back, and Aisha, just 16 then, had devoured his collection, teaching herself statutes and precedents late into the night while her grandmother hummed gospel tunes in the next room, oblivious to the fire igniting in the girl's mind. Now at 19, that fire was her weapon, and she wielded it against the lie that had landed her here, a lie born from a white store clerk named Ethan Pratt, who'd turned a quiet afternoon into a nightmare. It had started 3 months ago, on a muggy June day, when Aisha stopped by Pratt's Jewelry on Beale Street to pick up a cheap chain for her brother Jamal's birthday, her $5 clutched in her fist as she browsed the glass cases, her braids swinging as she moved. Ethan, lean and pale with a smirk that never reached his eyes, had sidled up beside her, his breath hot with cheap cologne as he murmured that she could have the chain for free if she'd be nice to him, his hand brushing her arm in a way that made her stomach lurch. She jerked back, voice sharp, as she told him to keep his junk and his hands to himself, her rejection echoing in the empty store as his face twisted into something ugly, something mean. 2 days later, cops kicked down her door, cuffs snapping tight as they accused her of stealing a diamond bracelet worth $3 grand. A charge backed by grainy security footage Ethan swore showed her slipping it into her pocket, though Aisha knew the tape was doctored, her every move that day too careful to leave room for theft. The trial had been a sham, rushed through in a single afternoon, presided over by Judge Raymond Carver, a barrel-chested man with a gray buzz cut and a reputation that stretched across Memphis like a dark cloud, a judge who'd sent more black teens to prison than anyone could count, his rulings a rubber stamp for every cop and clerk who pointed a finger at kids like her. In court, Carver had barely glanced at the evidence, his watery blue eyes fixed on Aisha as he interrupted her stammered defense to call her a little thug who'd learn her place behind bars, his voice booming over the prosecutors. Weak objections while the all-white jury nodded along, their faces blank as stone. Aisha had tried to speak, to point out the tape's blurry timestamps and Ethan's shaky story, but Carver cut her off, gavel slamming as he sentenced her to 20 years, a punishment so steep it sucked the air from the room, leaving her grandmother sobbing in the back row and Jamal clenching his fists beside her, his 17-year-old rage powerless against the machine that swallowed his sister whole. Now in this cell, Aisha traced the napkin's edges, her handwriting jagged but precise as she mapped out her appeal, citing the Sixth Amendment for a fair trial she'd never gotten, her uncle's voice echoing in her head about how justice was a puzzle if you knew the pieces. She'd memorized entire chapters of Tennessee law, her mind a steel trap that held every loophole and exception, and she knew Carver's bias alone was grounds to fight, his mockery a violation of judicial conduct she could prove if she got the chance. The guards outside her cell paced like wolves, their boots clacking on the sticky floor, their taunts slipping through the bars as they called her a wannabe lawyer who'd rot in here, one of them snickering that black girls like her didn't belong anywhere but a cage. She ignored them, her pulse steady as she finished her notes, each word a brick in the wall she'd built to climb out of this pit, her resolve hardening like the concrete beneath her. But then the cell door creaked open, and a guard with a pockmarked face and a cruel grin stomped in, his meaty hand snatching the napkin from her grip before she could react, his laughter grating as he tore it into scraps and let them flutter to the floor like dirty snow. Aisha lunged, her voice a low growl as she demanded it back, but he shoved her against the wall, his breath sour as he hissed that she'd better learn to shut up or he'd make her, his fist hovering an inch from her jaw before he turned and swaggered out, slamming the door behind him. She sank to her knees, fingers trembling as she stared at the shredded pieces, her lifeline to freedom scattered across the filth, and for a moment despair clawed at her chest, heavy and cold. But then she closed her eyes, exhaling slow and deep, and began reciting the notes in her head, every citation, every argument, her memory a fortress no guard could breach. She pictured Carver's smug face, Ethan's oily smirk, the jury's blank stares, and vowed she'd bury them all under the weight of their own lies, her mind racing faster now, unshackled by the loss, because she didn't need paper to fight. She needed fire, and that burned brighter than ever. The cell walls seemed to close in, the heat pressing harder, but Aisha sat taller, her lips moving silently as she rebuilt her case from scratch, each word a promise that this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning, a spark that would grow into a blaze no one could ignore. Aisha Coleman paced the narrow confines of her Memphis cell, her bare feet slapping the grimy floor as she muttered legal arguments under her breath, her mind a steel vault where every statute she'd memorized locked tight, unshaken by the guards, who'd shredded her napkin days ago, their laughter still echoing in her ears like a taunt she'd turn into fuel. She'd spent sleepless nights piecing together an appeal, her only tools a borrowed pencil stub and a stack of wrinkled forms she'd bartered for with her meal rations, her handwriting cramped but fierce as she cited Carver's bias, the rushed trial, and the Sixth Amendment's promise of fairness she'd never tasted. She'd found an ally in Jerome, a wiry janitor with graying hair who'd slipped her extra paper after overhearing her recite case law through the bars. His eyes wide, with something like awe as he whispered, he'd mail her motion himself, risking his job to get it to the courthouse. Days bled into weeks, the cell's heat a suffocating blanket, but then the door clanged open, and a guard tossed her a crumpled summons, growling that she'd gotten a retrial, his scowl proof he hated her for it. Aisha clutched the paper, her pulse hammering as she read the order. A junior judge named Hargrove had seen her appeal and smelled the rot in Carver's ruling, granting her a second chance she'd clawed out of nothing. She stepped into the courtroom a month later, her orange jumpsuit swapped for a thrift store blazer Jerome's wife had smuggled in, her braids pulled tight as she stood before Judge Raymond Carver again, his broad face flushed red above his black robe, his watery eyes narrowing at the sight of her unbowed. The room buzzed with spectators, their murmurs a mix of curiosity and scorn. As Carver leaned forward, his voice dripping venom as he barked that she was a jailhouse clown who thought she could play lawyer, his words a whip cracking through. The air meant to break her spirit before she'd even begun. Aisha stood still, her chin high, letting his mockery wash over her like rain on steel, her silence louder than his rant as she waited for her turn, every eye in the room glued to her, waiting for the collapse he'd predicted. When Carver finally paused, wiping sweat from his brow, she stepped to the defense table, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, steady and clear as she dismantled the prosecution's case, pointing out the security tapes spliced frames, Ethan Pratt's conflicting testimony, and Carver's own refusal to hear her evidence, each argument a brick she stacked against their flimsy lies. She quoted Tennessee Code Annotated, Section 40-35, her memory flawless as she proved the trial's procedural flaws, her words flowing so fast the prosecutor, Miles Donovan, a lanky man with a pinched face, stumbled over his objections, his papers scattering as he tried to keep up. The crowd shifted, whispers turning to gasps as Aisha flipped the script, her logic airtight, her poise unshakable, and even Carver's smug grin faltered, his meaty hands clenching the bench as she finished, demanding a full acquittal based on the state's failure to prove guilt beyond doubt. Donovan slumped, his rebuttal a weak mumble about technicalities. But the room knew she'd won, Hargrove's order upheld, her retrial a green light that lit a fire under her feet. She felt it, that flicker of freedom, her chest swelling. With the first real hope in months, her mind racing to the moment she'd walk out and hug Jamal, tell her grandmother she'd made it through. But then the gavel slammed, Carver's voice booming that court was recessed, his glare promising something worse than defeat as he stormed off the bench, leaving Aisha to savor her triumph for a heartbeat too long. She didn't see Ethan Pratt. In the back row, his pale fingers texting a guard he'd slipped $50 to earlier, a deal sealed with a nod as the man slipped into the jail that night, planting a baggie of pills in Aisha's mattress while she slept, his boots quiet as a snake on the prowl. Morning broke with chaos, guards bursting into her cell, their shouts a storm as they tore apart her bunk, the baggie glinting in the dim light as they yanked her arms behind her back, cuffs biting deep while they sneered she'd never fool anyone now, a drugged-up thug who'd rot in solitary. Aisha's knees hit the floor, her victory snatched away in a heartbeat, her breath ragged as they dragged her down the hall, the cell door slamming shut on her screams, her mind spinning with the realization that Ethan's reach stretched further than she'd feared. His racism a venom that poisoned every step she took. She pounded the steel door, her fists bruising as she cursed Carver's shadow over this setup. Her retrial a hollow prize now, the walls of solitary closing in like a tomb, cold and dark and endless. Could this black teen really outsmart a system built to crush her, or had she just lit the fuse on her own destruction? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think Aisha's fight exposes the ugly truth of courtroom racism. Give this a like if you're rooting for her to turn the tables, and subscribe to catch every twist as she battles these snakes. What do you think Ethan's next move will be when she claws her way back? Will he double down, or has he already lost control? Aisha Coleman curled into a ball on the thin mat of her solitary cell, the darkness swallowing her whole as the Memphis jail's concrete walls dripped with damp rot, her breath shallow from the hunger gnawing at her gut, her body shivering in the stale air that reeked of mold and despair, the guard's latest punishment for her defiance, cutting her meals to scraps of bread and murky water she could barely choke down. She'd been locked here for days since Ethan Pratt's drug plant flipped her retrial victory into a nightmare. Her wrists chafed raw from cuffs that never came off, her mind racing to hold on to the legal arguments she'd built, now trapped. In her skull with no paper to spill them onto, the silence broken only by the guards' boots clomping outside her door, their voices slithering through the slot as they scratched slurs into the paint with their keys, words like filthy crook, and black trash carving deeper wounds than their fists ever could. She traced the jagged letters with trembling fingers, her skin prickling at the hate etched into her cage, each insult a reminder of Judge Raymond Carver's shadow looming over this hell, his courtroom mockery just the start of a war she hadn't seen coming, his power stretching into these walls to choke her spirit before she could breathe free. She'd won that retrial motion, her words slicing through Miles Donovan's flimsy case like a hot knife, her memory spitting out precedents that left the prosecutor stammering, her victory a crack in the system's armor she'd pried open. With nothing but her mind, but now that crack was slamming shut, Ethan's bribe a poison spreading faster than she could fight, and Carver, she knew, was the puppet master pulling every string. She rocked back and forth, her braids matted with sweat, her eyes burning as she replayed the courtroom, Carver's red face twisting when Hargrove's order came through, his recess a dodge to regroup, his hatred a promise he'd bury her deeper than 20 years ever could. She'd heard whispers from other inmates, tales of Carver's wrath, how he'd once sentenced a black kid to life for jaywalking after the boy's mom dared to speak up, his gavel a hammer that crushed lives without. Blinking, and now Aisha was his target, her appeal a slap he'd never forgive. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, and forced her mind to work, drafting a federal complaint in her head, a lifeline she'd smuggle out somehow, her words sharp as she accused the prison of cruel and unusual punishment. Her Eighth Amendment shield against this torture, her only hope a crack of light in this abyss. She muttered the clauses aloud, her voice hoarse but steady, picturing the filing hitting a judge's desk, exposing the guard's starvation games, the slurs, the setup, her every syllable a brick in a wall she'd build to climb out. Her resolve, a ember glowing hotter with each passing hour. Then she heard it, A shuffle beyond the door and Jerome's raspy whisper slipped through, the janitor risking everything again as he slid a torn envelope under the slot, his voice trembling as he said he'd mail whatever she wrote, his footsteps fading fast before the guards could catch him. Aisha snatched it, her heart pounding as she scribbled her complaint with a pencil nub she'd hidden in her sock, her handwriting wild but legible as she poured out the abuse, the racism, the frame-up, her plea a flare shot into the dark, sealed, with spit and shoved back under the door before the next patrol. She sank back, chest heaving, praying Jerome's gamble would pay off, her mind clinging to the chance she'd break this cage, her body weak, but her will ironclad. But then the rumors hit, whispers leaking through the walls from inmates down the hall, word that Carver had caught wind of her move, his fury boiling over as he stormed the DA's office, slamming his fist on Miles Donovan's desk, demanding new charges to crush her for good, his voice a growl that echoed through the jail's grapevine, chilling Aisha's blood as she pieced it together. By nightfall, the cell door flew open, guards dragging her out, their grips bruising as they hauled her to a hearing room, her legs buckling from hunger but her head high, her jumpsuit filthy as she faced Carver again, his robe swapped for a suit but his sneer unchanged, his eyes glinting with triumph as Donovan stood beside him, papers in hand announcing a fresh charge, drug trafficking, a felony cooked up from the planted pills, carrying life without parole. Aisha's stomach dropped, her retrial win a distant memory as Carver leaned in, his breath sour as he hissed she'd never see daylight again, his words a vow that this was her grave, her fight a spark he'd snuff out with a system rigged to break black girls like her. She stared back, her gaze ablade, her mind racing as they dragged her back to solitary, the door slamming shut on a life sentence she hadn't earned, her complaint her only rope, but Carver's reach a noose tightening fast. She sank to the floor, her body screaming, her spirit roaring, knowing this wasn't just retaliation, it was racial annihilation, and she'd either burn it down or die trying. Aisha Coleman lay shivering on the icy floor of her solitary cell, her bones aching from the relentless chill that seeped through the Memphis jail's cracked concrete, her stomach a hollow pit after days of nothing but crusts and tepid water, her body a fragile shell holding a mind that burned hotter than ever, her federal complaint a fragile thread she clung to as the guards' boots stomped past, their sneers about her black hide rotting in here, a constant drone she tuned. Out, her focus locked on the appeal she'd smuggled out through Jerome, the janitor who'd risked his neck for her twice now. She'd scratched that plea in the dark, her pencil nub trembling as she detailed the starvation, the slurs carved into her walls, the planted pills, her Eighth Amendment armor against this torture. And she'd prayed it would hit a desk beyond. Carver's reach, a faint hope that kept her breathing through the endless nights, her braids tangled with grime as she whispered the clauses to herself, a mantra against the despair clawing at her edges. Then it happened, a miracle slicing through the gloom, the cell door creaking open as a guard with a lazy eye tossed her a crumpled notice, his grunt about a federal review barely audible over her pounding heart, her eyes scanning the page that said Judge Lena Hargrove, the same junior judge who'd granted her retrial, had caught her complaint ordering her release from solitary and a hearing on the drug trafficking charge, a lifeline Aisha seized with both hands, her legs wobbling as they hauled her out, her body weak but her spirit surging. A chance to breathe free air again. She stumbled into the courthouse 2 days later, her thrift store blazer hanging loose on her gaunt frame, her skin ashen from hunger, but her eyes blazing as she faced Judge Raymond Carver once more, his broad shoulders hunched behind the bench, his face a mask of fury as he glared down at her, his voice a low growl as he muttered she'd crawled out of her hole to waste his time, his words dripping with the same venom that had sentenced her, the crowd's murmurs a mix of shock and disdain as she stood tall unshaken by his hate. She took the floor, her voice ringing clear despite the rasp in her throat, reciting case law like a sermon, dismantling the trafficking charge with surgical precision, pointing out the lack of fingerprints on the baggie, the guards inconsistent, logs the absence of witnesses, her memory a weapon that carved through Miles Donovan's flimsy evidence, his papers fluttering as he tried to interrupt, his objections drowned by her torrent of logic, Tennessee v. Garner and Brady v. Maryland, rolling off her tongue as she proved the state's case, was a house of cards built on lies. The room tilted, spectators leaning forward, their breaths held as Donovan's face paled, his stammered rebuttal about circumstantial proof crumbling under her onslaught, and even Carver's jaw tightened, his smugness fading as she finished, demanding the charge be dropped, her victory a beacon she could almost touch, her mind racing to Jamal's smile, her grandmother's embrace, the life she'd reclaim. Carver recessed, his gavel a thunderclap as he stormed off, his eyes promising vengeance, but Aisha stood rooted, her chest swelling with triumph, her shackles gone, her spirit soaring as whispers of genius rippled through the crowd, moments she'd earned with blood and grit. She didn't see Ethan Pratt lurking outside, his lean frame pacing the lot, his phone buzzing as he dialed a number he'd paid good money for, his voice a hiss as he ordered a gang of 3 to find Jamal Coleman, her 17-year-old brother, a kid with a lanky build and a quiet laugh she'd missed every day in here. They caught him that night, outside their shotgun house on the city's edge, his sneakers scuffing the dirt as he walked home from a corner store, the gang's pickup roaring up, tires squealing as they leapt out, their fists and boots a blur. As they pummeled him, his cries swallowed by the dark, his body crumpling under blows that cracked ribs and split skin, a message carved in blood for Aisha's defiance, Ethan's revenge, a blade sharper than any law could blunt. Cops found him hours later, sprawled in the weeds, his pulse faint as they rushed him to St. Francis Hospital, his coma a silent scream that hit Aisha like a freight train when a guard shoved a phone at her the next morning, her grandmother's, sobs crackling through the line, her words a jumble of "they got him and he won't wake up," Aisha's knees buckling as she sank to the floor, her victory ashes in her mouth, her freedom a cruel joke as Carver's smirk flashed in her mind, his recess a setup she'd missed, his power a noose tightening around her family now. She clutched the phone, her scream a raw wound, her mind spinning as she realized this wasn't just about her anymore. It was war, and Ethan's gang had drawn first blood, leaving her brother a ghost in a hospital bed, her fight a chain that bound them all, her resolve hardening into something feral. As she vowed to burn their world down, Carver's grin a target she'd erase no matter the cost. Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think Aisha's brilliance can't be stopped by this racist system. Smash that like button if you're raging at Ethan's cowardice, and subscribe to see her strike back against these monsters. What lengths will Aisha go to when her family's on the line, and how deep does Carver's corruption run? Aisha Coleman sat hunched in her solitary cell, the Memphis jail's dank air clinging to her skin like a shroud, her hands trembling as she clutched a smuggled burner phone Jerome had slipped her through a food slot, her fingers fumbling over the cracked screen as she hacked into Ethan Pratt's bank records, her mind a storm of grief and fury after Jamal's beating left him comatose, his broken body a silent accusation that fueled her every move, her resolve a jagged edge sharper. Then the guards' taunts about her black blood staining their jail. She'd barely slept since the call from her grandmother, her eyes swollen from tears she refused to shed again, her heart a drumbeat of rage as she pictured Ethan's smirk, Judge Raymond Carver's sneer, the gang's fists raining down on her brother, each memory a match struck against the darkness, lighting a fire she'd wield to burn them all. She'd learned to crack passwords from a cousin years back, a skill she'd honed on borrowed laptops, and now it paid off. The phone's dim glow revealing Ethan's payoffs to the guard who'd planted the pills, a $200 transfer. Time-stamped the night her retrial win turned sour, her breath catching as she screenshot the proof, her evidence a grenade she'd lob into the world. She needed an outlet, someone to blast this wide open, and she found it in Lena Brooks, a scrappy local reporter who'd slipped her a note through Jerome after the last hearing, promising to dig if Aisha fed her dirt, her card crumpled, but gold. He and Aisha's shaking hands as she typed a message, attaching the screenshots with a plea to expose Ethan and Carver, her words a whispered prayer as she hit send. The phone smuggled back out before the guard's next sweep, her chest tight with hope she couldn't afford to lose. Hours ticked by, the cell's silence a weight pressing her down. But then the jail buzzed with whispers, inmates tapping codes on pipes that said the story had hit, Lena's article screaming online about Carver's corruption, Ethan's bribes, the gang attack tied to their names. her burner phone gambit a spark that lit up Memphis like a flare, protesters gathering outside the courthouse by dawn, their chants a distant roar that reached Aisha's ears, her lips twitching into a ghost of a smile as she imagined Carver squirming, Ethan sweating, her victory a blade twisting in their guts. She leaned against the wall, her body weak from hunger but her spirit soaring, picturing Jamal waking to a city on fire for him, her counterattack a thunderclap she'd orchestrated from this pit, her mind racing to the next move, freedom so close she could taste it through the mildew and rust. But then the cell block shook, guards storming in with batons drawn, their shouts a chaos of orders as they dragged her out, her knees scraping concrete as they hauled her to a hearing room, her blazer swapped back for cuffs that bit deeper than ever, her heart sinking as Carver loomed behind the bench, his face purple with rage, his gavel slamming as he roared about tainted evidence from her criminal stunt, his voice a bellow that drowned the murmurs of a packed courtroom, spectators craning to see the girl who dared to strike back. He declared a mistrial, his words a sledgehammer smashing her retrial, claiming the article poisoned the case, his eyes glinting with a triumph that said he'd won again, ordering her held without bail, his power a wall she couldn't climb, her hope a flickering candle he snuffed out with a smirk. Aisha's stomach twisted, her victory ashes once more, her mind reeling as guards seized her arms, their grips bruising as they marched her through the courthouse halls, their boots echoing like war drums, her breath hitching when they stopped in a side room, Carver's shadow lingering as they shoved her to her knees, their hands ripping at her jumpsuit, tearing it open in a public strip search that bared her skin to a dozen leering eyes, their laughter a blade slicing through her dignity. Her body, trembling as they pawed at her braids, one spitting that black rats didn't deserve privacy, her humiliation a spectacle Carver watched from the doorway, his grin a silent dare to break, his racism a whip cracking louder than ever. She clenched her jaw, her eyes locked on his, refusing to flinch as they yanked her upright, her jumpsuit hanging in tatters, her skin prickling with cold and shame, but her spirit a furnace roaring hotter, her mind already plotting the next strike. This degradation of fuel she'd turn against them, her vow a whisper in her skull that they'd pay tenfold for every tear they'd ripped from her soul. They dragged her back to solitary, the door slamming shut on a cell darker than before, her body bruised, her dignity shredded, but her will a steel beam bending under their weight, not breaking, her thoughts racing to Lena, to the protests, to the crack she'd opened, knowing Carver's mistrial was a dodge, Ethan's gang a blade and this search a message, a racial power play to crush her spark. But she'd rise from this ash, her fight a wildfire they couldn't contain, her next move a mystery even she couldn't predict, her brother's blood a war cry she'd answer, with every ounce of her genius. Aisha Coleman slumped against the rusted bars of her maximum security cell, her body a map of bruises from the strip search that still stung her skin, the Memphis jail's air thick with the stench of sweat and bleach, her mind reeling from the mistrial Judge Raymond Carver had slammed down like a guillotine, her tattered jumpsuit barely clinging to her frame as she traced the cold steel, her fingers trembling, but her resolve a molten core that refused to cool, the echoes of guards. Laughter and Carver's smirk a fuel she'd turn into a weapon, her every breath a vow to claw her way out of this pit. Lena Brooks' article had ignited a firestorm outside, protesters flooding the courthouse steps, with signs calling Carver a crook and Ethan Pratt a thug, their voices a distant thunder that rattled the jail's walls. Her burner phone stunt, a match that lit up the city, her evidence of Ethan's bribes and Carver's bias, a beacon that drew eyes she hadn't expected, including Carla Ruiz, a federal agent with a clipped voice and a sharp gaze who'd slipped into town. Her badge, a promise of justice Aisha could barely believe in after months of betrayal. She'd heard whispers from inmates, tales of Ruiz grilling guards about the drug plant, her questions cutting through their lies like a scalpel, her investigation a thread Aisha clung to as she sat in this new cell, her body locked down but her mind racing, drafting a motion she'd memorized since the strip search, a blistering attack on Carver's prejudice she'd smuggle out through a kitchen worker who'd nodded at her in passing, her words a spear aimed at his heart, accusing him of racial conspiracy under federal law, her memory spitting out Title 18, Section 242 like a war chant. She scratched it into the wall with a splintered nail, her handwriting shaky but fierce. Each letter a brick in the case she'd build, her hope a flicker she fanned with every scrape, knowing Ruiz was out there, digging, her presence a crack. In the system's armor, Aisha had pried wider with every fight. Days later, the cell door groaned open, guards hauling her out with less venom than before, their eyes darting as they marched her to a hearing, her cuffs loose for once, her blazer back on her shoulders, a sign something had shifted, her pulse hammering as she stepped into a courtroom buzzing with tension. Carver sidelined to a witness chair, his face a mask of barely contained rage as Judge Patel, a wiry man with dark eyes and a calm voice, took the bench, his gavel a quiet tap that silenced the room, his order granting her motion a shockwave. That hit her like sunlight. A new judge for her retrial, Carver's bias too glaring to ignore. She stood tall, her voice steady as she thanked Patel, her mind a whirlwind of plans as she walked out unshackled, her wrists free for the first time in months, her chest swelling with a triumph she'd earned with grit and genius. Protesters, cheering beyond the glass as she imagined Jamal's face, her grandmother's tears, a life she'd snatched back from their jaws. She didn't see Ethan Pratt in the shadows, his lean frame pacing a back alley, his phone pressed to his ear as he hissed orders to a guard he'd bribed with $500, his voice a snarl as he demanded a shank planted in her old cell, her fingerprints smeared on it from a cup they'd stolen, his plan a dagger aimed at her heart, a murder charge for an inmate stabbed that morning, a setup so tight it'd bury her deeper than Carver's mistrial ever could. She returned to the jail for processing, her step light with victory, her mind on the next hearing, but the air shifted, guards swarming her with batons raised, their shouts a chaos of "killer" and "you're done." Her wrists snapped, back into cuffs as they dragged her to a lineup, her breath hitching when they shoved a bloody shank under her nose, her prints glinting on the handle, her stomach dropping as they accused her of slashing a woman named Tasha in solitary, a lie so bold it stole her air, her victory a mirage dissolving into this nightmare. She screamed innocence, her voice raw. As they hauled her to a hearing room, Carver back in his suit, his grin a crescent moon of malice as he leaned into Donovan's ear, his whisper a poison that turned the prosecutor's face smug, his words a vow that she'd rot for this, a life. Sentence stacked on her trafficking charge, his power a web she couldn't escape, his racism a noose tightening with every step. They locked her in a new cell, the walls tighter, the air colder, her blazer stripped away, her body trembling as she sank to the floor, her triumph ashes once more, her mind spinning with the realization that Ethan's gang wasn't his only weapon. Carver's strings stretched further, pulling guards, planting lies, breaking her family, her fight a spark they'd drown in blood, her brother's coma a warning she'd ignored, this murder charge a grave they'd dug with her name on it. She clenched her fists, her nails drawing blood, her spirit a roar against the silence, knowing Ruiz was out there. Patel was watching, but Carver's grin said he'd win. His system a machine she'd either dismantle or die beneath. Her next move a gamble with stakes higher than ever. Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think Carver's corruption proves the system's rotten to the core. Hit that like button if you're screaming for Aisha to rip these liars apart, and subscribe to see if she can dodge this deadly trap. How far will Ethan's desperation push him when the feds close in? And can Aisha turn this frame-up into her ultimate weapon? Aisha Coleman crouched in the corner of her maximum security cell, the Memphis jail's air a suffocating mix of rust and despair, her body a tapestry of welts from the guards' rough hands, her jumpsuit torn at the seams as she pressed her back to the icy wall. Her mind a whirlwind of survival after Ethan Pratt's shank frame-up pinned her with a murder charge, her wrists raw from cuffs that never loosened, her every breath a fight against the weight of Tasha's blood they'd smeared on her name, a lie so heavy it threatened to crush her spirit, but her eyes burned with a fire no cell could douse. She'd heard the whispers through the bars, inmates hissing about a white supremacist gang called the Iron Fist, their voices a low growl as they promised to slit her throat for snitching on Ethan, their threats a chorus that echoed in the dark, her solitude a cage within a cage as guards turned blind eyes, their smirks proof they'd let it happen, her black skin a target they'd painted red with every taunt, every shove, every meal they forgot to bring. She rocked on her heels, her braids matted with sweat, her mind racing to unravel the shank's origin, her memory replaying every touch, every cup she'd held, until it clicked. A guard named Vickers with a scar on his knuckles had swapped. Her water days ago, his grin too wide as he'd lingered. Her prints lifted from that plastic rim now glinting on a blade she'd never touched. Her realization a spark she'd fan into a blaze. She needed proof, a way out, and she found it in Marcus, a lanky inmate with a limp who'd owed her a favor since she'd helped him draft a parole letter months back, his eyes darting as he slipped her a folded note during a yard transfer. His whisper about Vickers' late-night talks with Ethan, a lifeline she seized, her fingers trembling as she tucked it into her sock, her plan a gamble to smuggle it to Carla Ruiz, the federal agent sniffing around Carver's dirt, her only shot at cracking this tomb. She waited for the night shift, her pulse a drumbeat as she tapped a code on the pipes, Marcus tapping back that he'd mailed it through a kitchen runner. Her breath held as she pictured Ruiz's sharp eyes scanning the note, her badge a battering, ram against Ethan's lies, her hope a thread stretching beyond these walls. Days crawled by, the gang's threats louder, their boots scuffing closer in the yard. But then the jail shook, sirens wailing as feds stormed Pratt's jewelry on Beale Street, their shouts a distant echo that reached her cell, Ruiz leading, the charge with warrants in hand. Ethan's pale face caught on news cameras as they cuffed him, his store a front for cash he'd funneled to guards and gangs, her shank note the key that unlocked his cage, her murder charge teetering as Ruiz grilled Vickers, his stammered denials crumbling under her glare. Aisha's evidence a lifeline pulling her from the brink. She sank against the wall, her chest heaving with relief, her mind tasting freedom again, her lips whispering Jamal's name as she pictured him waking, her victory a crack widening in their armor, Ethan's arrest a thunderclap she'd orchestrated from this pit, her genius a light piercing the dark. But then the cell block erupted, guards slamming doors as word spread. Carver's voice a ghost in her ears, his power unbroken even from the sidelines, his fury a storm she'd unleashed, her hope a candle flickering too soon as the iron fist struck back. Their leader, a hulking man named Boone with a shaved head and a swastika tattoo, bribing a guard with a grand to smuggle him her location, his gang a pack of wolves howling for her blood, their plan a firebomb lobbed at her grandmother's shotgun house that night. The blaster roar that shook the city's edge, flames licking the sky as her cousins, Dion and Lila, screamed inside, trapped by a wall of heat, Aisha's world collapsing in a call from a nurse who'd found her number in Jamal's wallet, her voice cracking as she said the kids were burned but alive barely, their home ash. Carver's revenge a racial torch that scorched her roots, his smirk a shadow she felt through the miles. She crumpled to the floor, her scream a raw wound tearing through the cell, her hands clawing at the concrete as guards laughed beyond the bars, her victory a hollow shell shattered by this arson, her family's blood a price she'd never meant to pay. Ethan's cuffs a distraction while Carver pulled strings, his gang a blade he'd sharpened to gut her soul, her fight a spark that lit this inferno. Her brother's coma a warning, her cousin's burns a war cry, her mind spinning with the realization that Ruiz's raid was just a skirmish. Carver's reach a hydra growing heads, this firebomb a message she'd either answer or drown in, her body shaking as she vowed to rise, her genius a weapon she'd wield through the flames, her next move a gamble with stakes higher than life, her family's scars a map to his ruin, Carver's grin a target she'd erase, no matter how deep. She had to dig. Taisha Coleman sat rigid in her maximum security cell, the Memphis jail's air a choking blend of ash and rage, her hands clenched into fists as she replayed the nurse's call about the firebomb that torched her grandmother's house. Her cousins, Dion and Lila alive but scarred, their screams a haunting echo that fueled her every thought, her body trembling with a fury so raw it drowned the guards' taunts about her black kin burning for her sins, her mind a steel trap snapping. Shut on one truth. Judge Raymond Carver had lit this match, his power a wildfire she'd smother with her bare hands. She'd heard their cries through the phone. Dion's voice a rasp as he begged for water, Lila's sobs a knife in her gut, her grandmother's home a pile of cinders on the city's edge. The Iron Fist gang's swastika scrawled in soot, a racial scar she'd never unsee. Her family's survival a miracle she'd turn into a war cry, her resolve a blade sharpened by every tear they'd shed. She paced the cell, her jumpsuit stiff with dried sweat, her braids swinging as she drafted a civil suit in her head, her memory a vault of federal statutes she'd memorized. Title 42, Section 1983, roaring through her skull as she accused Carver of racial conspiracy. Her words a spear she'd hurl from this cage. Her only paper a scrap of cardboard she'd begged off a kitchen worker. Her pencil nub a lifeline as she scratched her claim, each line a brick, in a wall she'd build to bury him. She smuggled it out through Marcus, the lanky inmate who'd risked his neck again, his limp heavier as he whispered he'd mail it, her heart pounding as she pictured it hitting a clerk's desk, her fight a flare shot into the dark, her cousin's burns a fuel that kept her burning. Days later, Carla Ruiz stormed the jail, her federal badge glinting as she grilled guards about the firebomb, her voice a whip cracking through their lies, her investigation unearthing Carver's bank ties to Ethan Pratt's family, a web of cash that funded the Iron Fist, her wiretaps catching his hissed orders to teach that girl a lesson. Aisha's evidence a key that unlocked his vault, her civil suit a thunderclap that shook the system's roots. Protests swelled outside, hundreds chanting her name, their signs a forest of fury calling Carver a monster. Ethan a pawn, her story a flame spreading beyond Memphis, her cell a crucible where she forged this uprising, her mind racing as Ruiz's. Raid flipped the script, Ethan's arrest a crack she'd widened, her murder charge a ghost fading under Patel's gaze. The cell door swung open, guards dragging her out with grudging steps, their eyes averted as they marched her to a hearing, her cuffs clinking as Judge Patel took the bench, his voice steady as he granted her bail, her civil suit's weight tipping the scales, her body weak but her spirit soaring as she stepped into the courthouse lobby, protesters erupting in cheers beyond the glass, their roar a wave that lifted her, her blazer back on her shoulders, her wrists free, her chest swelling with a triumph she'd clawed from their jaws. Jamal's coma a shadow, her cousin's survival a light, freedom a breath she'd earned with genius and grit. She stood tall, her eyes scanning the crowd, her mind on the next strike. But then the air split, a gunshot ringing out as Carver's hired hitman, a wiry figure in a grey hoodie, fired from the throng, the bullet grazing her arm, her blood splattering. The marble floor as panic erupted, protesters screaming as they scattered, her knees buckling as she dove behind a pillar, her victory a mirage shredded by this ambush, her arm throbbing as she pressed it tight, her breath ragged as she realized Carver's reach stretched beyond bars, his racism a gun aimed at her heart, Ethan's gang a distraction while he pulled triggers, his desperation a storm she'd underestimated. She peeked out, her eyes locking on the shooter's retreat, his hoodie vanishing into the chaos, her mind spinning as guards rushed in, their shouts a blur as they hauled her back inside, her bail a hollow prize now, her family's scars a map she'd followed to this edge. Carver's grin a ghost she felt in the sting, his hitman a blade he'd sharpened to gut her rally, her fight a spark that lit this gunfire, her protesters' cheers a chorus drowned by screams, her genius a shield, bending under his weight, her next move a gamble with stakes bloodier than ever. She sank against the wall, her arm dripping red, her spirit a roar against the pain, knowing Ruiz was out there. Patel was watching, but Carver's shot said he'd kill before he'd fall, his system a beast she'd either slay or bleed beneath. Her cousin's burns a vow, her brother's silence a debt. This graze a warning she'd answer with fire, her triumph a tightrope snapping under her feet. Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think Aisha's courage is rewriting justice one fight at a time. Smash that like button if Carver's hitman makes your blood boil, and subscribe to see her dodge this bullet and strike back. What's Carver cooking up next when his shot misses the mark? And how will Aisha turn this wound into her winning blow? Aisha Coleman stood in the Memphis courthouse, her arm throbbing under a bandage where the hitman's bullet had grazed her. The sting a dull pulse as she faced Judge Patel, her blazer stained with dried blood, but her voice a steel rod cutting through the room's hum, her mind a fortress rebuilt from the ashes of her cousin's burned home, her resolve a furnace stoked by every slur, every blow, every lie they'd thrown at her, her eyes locked on Judge Raymond Carver as he sat in the witness box, his broad face a mask of barely contained fury, his suit crisp, but his power fraying under the weight of Carla Ruiz's wiretaps, her federal probe a hammer she'd swung to crack his empire. She'd spent the night in a holding cell after the shooting, her arm patched by a nurse who'd whispered about protesters, still chanting her name outside, her bail a fragile shield that kept her here, her body weak, but her spirit a wildfire. As she presented Ruiz's evidence, her voice steady as she played the tapes, Carver's growl ordering the hitman to silence that black rat booming through the speakers, his words a noose he'd tied himself, her genius a blade slicing. Through his lies, the crowd gasping as she dismantled the robbery charge, her memory spitting out discrepancies in Ethan Pratt's tape, her logic a torrent that drowned Miles Donovan's objections, his face paling as he sank into his chair, her victory a beacon she'd lit with blood and grit. She pointed to Carver, her finger steady as she accused him of racial conspiracy, Title 18, Section 242. Her shield as she proved his bias tainted every ruling, her civil suit a thunderclap that echoed beyond the walls. Patel's eyes narrowing as he scribbled notes, his gavel a quiet tap suspending Carver from the bench, his suspension a crack splitting the system's foundation, her robbery charge collapsing under her onslaught, the courtroom buzzing as Donovan quit mid-hearing, his resignation a mumble of defeat, her name cleared, a hero's mantle thrust upon her by a crowd roaring beyond the glass, hundreds hailing her as the girl who toppled a titan, her arms sting a badge of survival, her mind racing to Jamal's bedside, her grandmother's tears, a life she'd snatched back from their jaws. She stepped out, the lobby a sea of cheers, her chest swelling with a triumph she'd earned through every cell, every fight, every night she'd refused to break, her cousin's burns a scar she'd turned into strength, her brother's coma, a debt she'd repay with this win, freedom a breath she'd fought to taste. But then the air shifted, Ethan Pratt out on bail after Ruiz's raid, lurking in the chaos, his lean frame a shadow slipping through the crowd, his phone buzzing as he dialed a crew he'd hired with his last scraps of cash, his voice a hiss, ordering them to snatch Jamal from St. Francis Hospital, his revenge a blade sharper than Carver's bullet, her triumph a mirage he'd shred with one call. She didn't see it, her eyes on the protesters, her mind on the next step, but Ethan's goons moved fast, their van screeching into the hospital lot, their boots pounding as they stormed Jamal's room, his frail body limp under tubes as they ripped him from the bed, his monitors flatlining in a wail that pierced the ward, their fists bruising his arms as they dragged him out, a nurse's scream lost in their wake, their message a video sent to Aisha's burner phone hours later, her brother's face bloodied, his eyes half open as Ethan's voice snarled through the static, demanding she drop the civil suit or Jamal dies, his threat a bomb exploding in her chest, her victory ashes once more, her knees buckling as she sank to the courthouse steps, the phone trembling in her hands, her scream a raw wound tearing through the dusk, her triumph a hollow shell shattered by this kidnapping, Carver's suspension a distraction while Ethan struck, his gang a noose tightening around her family, her fight a spark that lit this abduction, her cousin's survival a fleeting hope, her genius a shield cracking under their weight, her next move a gamble with stakes bloodier than ever. She clutched the phone, her bandage soaking red as she pressed her wound, her spirit a roar against the panic. Knowing Ruiz was out there, Patel was watching, but Ethan's video said he'd kill before he'd lose, his desperation a beast she'd either slay or bleed beneath, her brother's life, a clock ticking down, her civil suit a prize he'd gut her family to steal, this kidnapping a racial vendetta she'd answer with every ounce of her mind, her triumph a tightrope snapping as she stood, her eyes scanning the horizon, her vow a whisper in the wind that she'd find him, save him, end them, no matter how. Deep she had to dig, Carver's shadow a ghost she'd banish, Ethan's grin a target she'd erase, her family's blood a war cry she'd carry to the end, her next step a plunge into a darkness she'd either conquer or die in, her heart pounding as she faced the abyss, her genius her only light. Aisha Coleman stood on the Memphis courthouse steps, her arm throbbing under the blood-soaked bandage, her burner phone clutched tight as Ethan Pratt's video looped in her mind, Jamal's bruised face a silent scream that clawed at her chest, his frail body slumped in a chair, Ethan's voice snarling through the static that she'd drop the civil suit or bury her brother, her triumph in court a hollow echo as she traced the phone's GPS signal, her genius a compass guiding her to an abandoned warehouse on the river's edge, her resolve a steel beam bending under grief but never breaking, her every breath a vow to save him. Carver's suspension a distraction she'd outrun, Ethan's kidnapping a gauntlet she'd smash with her bare hands. She'd slipped away from the protesters, their cheers fading as she met Carla Ruiz in a shadowed alley. The federal agent's eyes sharp as she handed Aisha a spare pistol, her voice clipped as she agreed to tail her. Her badge a backup Aisha didn't trust but needed. Her plan a tightrope she'd walk alone. Her blazer swapped for a hoodie to blend into the dusk. Her steps silent as she tracked the signal, the warehouse looming ahead, its rusted walls a fortress. Hiding her brother, her heart pounding as she crept closer. Ethan's goons a pack she'd outsmart, her mind a map of every move she'd memorized from law books and street fights. She slipped through a broken window, her boots crunching glass as she scanned the dim space. Crates towering like tombstones, the air thick with oil and rot. Her ears catching Jamal's faint groan from a back room, her pulse a war drum as she spotted Ethan's crew, 3 hulking men with shaved heads and iron fist tattoos, their laughter a growl as they smoked by a flickering bulb, her brother tied to a chair beyond them, his head lolling, blood dripping from his lip, her rage a furnace as she calculated her strike, her genius a blade she'd wield in silence. She moved like a shadow, her breath held as she looped behind crates, her fingers rigging a distraction, a metal pipe wedged against a loose beam, her shove sending it crashing to the floor, the noise a thunderclap that spun the goons around. Their shouts a chaos she exploited, her legs pumping as she darted to Jamal, her knife slicing his ropes before they turned back, his eyes fluttering open as she whispered his name, her arms hauling him up, his weight a burden she'd carry through. Hell! Ethan's roar echoing as he stormed in, his lean frame a silhouette against the bulb, his pistol glinting as he fired, the shot whizzing past her ear, her dodge a reflex honed by months of survival, her mind racing as she dragged Jamal to cover. Ruiz bursting in with her gun drawn, her shouts a shield that scattered the crew. Their retreat a scramble as Aisha live-streamed it all, her burner phone propped on a crate. Ethan's confession spilling out as he cursed her name, his words a noose he'd tied himself, the feed going viral in minutes, millions watching as Ruiz cuffed him, his gang bolting into the night. Jamal safe in her arms, her triumph a flare shot into the world, her brother's breath a victory she'd clawed from their jaws. She sank beside him, her chest heaving, her bandage soaked red as Ruiz called for backup, the warehouse a battlefield she'd won, Ethan's arrest a thunderclap she'd orchestrated, her live stream a weapon that buried him deeper, her genius, a light piercing the dark, her family a lifeline she'd pulled from the abyss, Jamal's weak grip on her hand a promise she'd kept, her civil suit a prize she'd defend with this proof, freedom a breath she'd fought to share with him, the protesters' distant cheers a chorus she'd earned. But then the jail erupted, sirens wailing as word hit the cell block. Carver's voice a ghost pulling strings from his suspension, his fury a storm she'd unleashed, his call to a loyal guard sparking a riot, inmates clashing with batons as guards unleashed tear gas, their shouts a chaos of Coleman's fault. Her supporters caught in the fray outside, their signs trampled as gas clouds billowed, protesters coughing and screaming as guards swung clubs, bones cracking under their weight. Carver's revenge, a racial lash that turned her rally into a war zone. His power a hydra growing heads, his riot a message she'd either answer or drown in. Jamal's rescue a spark that lit this bloodshed, her cousin's burns a warning, her brother's freedom a debt, this chaos a grave he dug to bury her name. She clutched Jamal tighter, her eyes streaming from gas that drifted through the city, her mind spinning as Ruiz hauled them to safety, her live stream a double-edged sword that rallied the world, but enraged Carver, his guards a pack she'd underestimated, their violence a racial vendetta she'd face head-on. Her triumph a mirage shredded by this uprising, her family's scars a map she'd followed to this edge. Ethan's cuffs a distraction while Carver struck, his riot a blade he'd sharpened to gut her movement, her fight a wildfire they'd drown in tears, her next move a gamble with stakes bloodier than ever, her spirit a roar against the smoke. Knowing Patel was watching, Ruiz was fighting, but Carver's chaos said he'd kill before he'd fall, his system a beast she'd either slay or bleed beneath, her brother's pulse a clock ticking down, This rescue a tightrope snapping under. Her feet, her genius, her only shield as she faced the storm. Her vow a whisper that she'd end him no matter how deep she had to dig. Aisha Coleman sat in a federal hearing room, her arm stiff under the bandage where the hitman's bullet had grazed her. Her body a map of exhaustion as she faced a panel of stern-faced judges, her blazer crisp despite the bloodstains, her voice a steady flame cutting through the Memphis air, thick with the ghosts of tear gas, her mind a fortress rebuilt from the riot's chaos. Jamal safe beside her, his bruised face a silent testament to her rescue, her resolve a steel rod forged in the fire of Carver's wrath, her every word a vow to bury him as she testified against Judge Raymond Carver. His broad frame slumped in the dock, his suit rumpled but his eyes glinting with a defiance she'd shatter, her live-stream evidence a noose tightening around his neck. Ethan Pratt's confession booming through the room, his curses a rope he'd tied himself, her genius a blade slicing through his empire, the judge's gasps a chorus as she laid out. His racial conspiracy, Title 18, Section 242 her shield as she proved his hitman order, his gang ties, his bias a poison that tainted every gavel strike, her civil suit a thunderclap that echoed beyond the walls, the panel's scribbled notes a sign she'd won, Carver's allies abandoning him mid-hearing, their whispers a retreat. As he was indicted for corruption, his suspension permanent, his power a crumbling throne she'd toppled with grit and fire, her name a hero's cry on protesters' lips outside, thousands hailing her as the girl who'd felled a titan, her family's scars a badge she'd turned into strength, Jamal's grip on her hand a victory she'd clawed from their jaws, freedom, a breath she'd fought to share, the courtroom buzzing as she stood tall, her chest swelling with a triumph she'd earned through every cell, every fight, every night she'd refused to break. She stepped into the lobby, her cousins Dion and Lila waiting, their burned skin a testament to survival, her grandmother's tears a river she'd crossed, the press conference a sea of flashing cameras as she prepared to speak. Lena Brooks. Beside her the reporter's grin a mirror of her own, Carla Ruiz nodding from the sidelines, her badge a shield she'd wielded, Aisha's voice ready to ignite the world with plans for a legal fund, her triumph a beacon she'd lit with blood and genius. But then the air split, tires screeching as Ethan's Iron Fist gang stormed the courthouse lot, their pickup roaring through the crowd, guns blazing as they fired into the throng, bullets ripping through flesh, Lena crumpling beside her, a red bloom spreading across her chest, her gasp a whisper as she fell. Ruiz diving for cover, her shoulder gushing blood as a slug tore through, Aisha's scream a raw wound as she dropped behind a bench, her arm throbbing as she pressed it. Tight? The gang's swastikas glinting in the dusk, their shouts a racial war cry that drowned the cheers, her victory a mirage shredded by this massacre, protesters scattering as bodies hit the ground. Their signs trampled in pools of red, her mind spinning as she crawled to Lena, her pulse gone, Ruiz groaning nearby, her triumph ashes once more, Carver's hand a ghost in this carnage, his jail cell no barrier to his reach, his note smuggled. To her hours later through a guard, his scrawl promising her death. His racism a gun he'd aimed through Ethan's pawns, the gang a blade he'd sharpened to gut her movement, her fight a spark that lit this bloodshed. Jamal's rescue a fleeting hope, her cousin's survival a debt, this ambush a grave he'd dug to bury her name, her spirit a roar against the gunfire, knowing Patel was watching. Ruiz was bleeding, but Carver's note said he'd kill before. He'd fade. His system a beast she'd either slay or die beneath. Her family's blood a clock ticking down, this massacre a tightrope snapping under her feet, her genius a shield cracking under their weight, her next move a gamble with stakes, deadlier than ever. She clutched Lena's hand, her eyes streaming as sirens wailed, her mind racing as medics stormed in, Ruiz's groans a lifeline she clung to, the gang vanishing into the night, their bullets a message she'd answer, Carver's indictment a hollow prize now, his note a vow he'd wield from behind bars, Ethan's arrest a distraction while he struck, his gang a noose tightening around her soul, her press conference a rally-turned-funeral, her legal fund a dream drowned in blood, her brother's pulse a debt she'd repay, her cousin's burns a map she'd followed to this edge, this carnage a racial vendetta she'd face head-on, her body shaking as she rose, her vow a whisper in the chaos that she'd end him, no matter how deep she had to dig. Carver's grin. A target she'd erase. Her family's tears a war cry she'd carry to the end. Her next step a plunge into a darkness she'd either conquer or bleed in. Her heart pounding as she faced the abyss. Her genius, her only light. Her spirit unbroken. As she stood amidst the wreckage, knowing this wasn't the end, it was a call to rise, her fight a wildfire they'd never contain. Aisha Coleman stood amidst the wreckage of the Memphis courthouse lot, her arm a throbbing knot under the blood-soaked bandage, her blazer tattered as she surveyed the chaos of the Iron Fist Gang's massacre. Lena Brooks' lifeless body a weight. In her arms, Carla Ruiz groaning beside her as medics swarmed, their shouts a blur against the sirens wailing through the dusk. Her mind a storm of grief and fury as she clutched Judge Raymond Carver's smuggled note, his scrawl vowing her death, a taunt she'd turn into ash, her resolve a steel beam forged. In the fire of every loss, her family's scars a map she'd followed to this edge, her genius a light piercing the dark as she rose, her body battered but her spirit a wildfire they'd never contain, her every breath a vow to end this war. Carver's indictment a stepping stone, Ethan Pratt's gang a pawn she'd crush, her next move a legacy she'd carve from their ruin. She'd spent the night in a hospital waiting room, Jamal beside her, his bruised face a mirror of her own, his weak grip on her hand a lifeline she'd fought to keep, her cousins Dion and Lila in burn wards down the hall, their survival a miracle. She'd honor, her grandmother's sobs a river she'd crossed, her civil suit winnings a fortune she'd won against Carver, $10 million in damages for racial conspiracy, a prize she'd wield to build something bigger, her voice steady as she drafted plans for the Justice Collective, a legal aid network for black teens, her press conference a ghost drowned in blood, but her vision a phoenix rising from this ash, her triumph a beacon she'd lit with every fight. Every cell, every night she'd refused to break, the world watching as she stood tall, her name a national cry for change, protesters swelling beyond the city, millions hailing her as the girl who'd felled a titan, her family's pain a debt she'd repay with this movement, freedom a breath she'd share with every kid they'd tried to cage, her chest swelling with a purpose she'd earned through grit and fire. She moved fast, her hospital discharge a blur as she rented an office downtown, her winnings a war chest she'd arm with lawyers and hope, her first case a boy named Malik, framed for theft, his braids a mirror of her own, her team a shield she'd wield against the system, her spirit soaring as she won his freedom in days, her network a flame spreading across Tennessee, then the South, then the nation, her face on every screen, her story a rally that drowned Carver's note, Ethan's bullets, the gang's swastikas, her cousin's burns, a fuel that kept her burning, Jamal's pulse a clock she'd reset, her triumph a tightrope she'd walked to this peak, her genius a weapon she'd wield for them all, the world a stage she'd claimed with blood and brilliance, her legacy a wall they'd never breach, freedom a breath she'd fought to gift, her family's tears a war cry she'd answered with every step. But then the floor dropped, Jamal's voice cracking through the office late one night, his wheelchair creaking as he rolled in, his eyes hollow as he confessed a truth that stole her air, his words a bomb exploding in her chest. He'd taken a bribe from Ethan months back, $500 to lie about her alibi the night of the robbery. His stammered claim she'd been home a thread Carver had unraveled, his betrayal a knife in her gut, her initial conviction a lie he'd fed, his coma a price he'd paid, her triumph souring as he sobbed, his hands trembling as he begged forgiveness, her mind spinning with the realization that her fight began with his cowardice, her family's blood a chain he'd forged, her genius a shield he'd pierced, her victory a mirage built on his deceit, Carver's note a taunt he'd armed, Ethan's frame up a trap he'd baited, her chest caving as she sank to the floor, her scream a raw wound tearing through the silence, her brother's eyes a mirror of her pain, her spirit a roar against this twist. Knowing Ruiz was out there, Patel was watching, but Jamal's confession said her war was hers alone, his bribe a ghost she'd carried, this reversal a grave he'd dug with her name, her movement a dream she'd reclaim, her next move a gamble with stakes heavier than ever. She clutched his hand, her bandage peeling as she pressed her wound, her voice a whisper as she forgave him, her love a thread she'd mend, her resolve a steel beam bending under this weight, not breaking, her mind racing as she vowed to rebuild. Trust, her Justice Collective a phoenix she'd raise higher, Carver's note a hint at a hidden ally still hunting her, his scrawl a shadow she felt in the dark. Her triumph, a fragile tightrope snapping under this truth. Her family's scars a map she'd redraw, this betrayal a racial pressure she'd overcome. Her brother's tears a debt she'd repay with every fight. Her genius a light she'd wield through this storm. Her spirit unbroken as she stood, her eyes scanning the horizon. Knowing this wasn't the end, it was a call to rise. Her fight a wildfire they'd never contain. Her next step a plunge into a darkness she'd conquer. Her heart pounding as she faced the abyss, her legacy a wall she'd fortify, freedom a breath she'd gift again, her vow a whisper that she'd end them all, no matter how deep she had to dig. Aisha Coleman's journey through a corrupt legal system offers profound lessons about resilience, justice, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. First, her story teaches us that brilliance can thrive in the darkest corners, even when shackled by racism and despair. Aisha, a 19-year-old black girl, turned a jail cell into a classroom, her self-taught legal mastery, a testament to the idea that knowledge is a weapon no one can strip away, no matter how hard they try to break you. Facing a racist judge, like Raymond Carver, who mocked her and rigged her fate, she didn't crumble, she built, proving that adversity can forge diamonds from coal if you refuse to let it bury you. Second, this tale hammers home the brutal reality of systemic injustice, showing how deep racial bias runs, from courtroom sneers to firebombs torching family homes, a reminder that the fight for fairness is a war with many fronts, each battle bloodier than the last. Aisha's victories, snatched away by setups and shootings, reveal that progress is fragile, often paid for with scars that never fade. Third, her story underscores the cost of betrayal, Jamal's confession a gut punch that rewrote her triumph. As a house of cards, teaching us that trust can be a double-edged sword, especially when racial pressure bends even those closest to you. Yet her forgiveness shows that healing starts with facing the truth, no matter how bitter. A lesson in grace under fire that lifts her above the wreckage. Finally, Aisha's Justice Collective proves that one voice can spark a movement, turning personal pain into collective power, a blueprint for anyone who's ever felt the system's boot on their neck, showing that change isn't just a dream, it's a fight you wage with every step. Her genius wasn't just in outsmarting Carver, it was in refusing to let his hate define her, a lesson that courage isn't loud, it's relentless, a quiet roar that echoes louder than gunfire. This story isn't just about surviving racism, it's about dismantling it, brick by prejudiced brick, and building something better from the rubble. So what's the takeaway? Stand tall, fight smart, and never let the world's weight crush your spark, because even in the darkest cell you can light a fire they'll never put out. Where do you see Aisha's fight in your own life? Drop a comment with your thoughts, hit that like button if her grit inspires you, and subscribe to catch more tales of justice rising from the ashes. Then share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for joining this journey through Aisha's storm. Your support keeps these stories alive. And here's wishing you the strength to face your own battles with the same unbreakable fire she carried to the end.